Berlin moved like a sleepwalker in March 1919. The war had ended, but nothing felt finished. Soldiers without uniforms roamed streets that no longer had sides. The monarchy was gone, swept away like soot, and what replaced it was as fragile as paper in the rain. The new government called itself a republic, though many weren't sure what that meant yet. Ministers changed weekly. Power was a rumor. Authority came not from law, but from whoever held the loudest voice and the firmest boots that day. That's when he appeared. No one noticed him at first. A man of average height, wrapped in a gray officer's overcoat, polished boots, a conservative hat. His posture was straight, his face unremarkable, but there was something in his walk, not confidence, exactly, but certainty. Like he'd been here before, like the city was waiting for him. At 10:42 a.m., he entered the administrative wing of the Reich Chancellery. He passed through the first checkpoint without presenting identification. The guards didn't stop him. Maybe they assumed he was from military intelligence. Maybe they were too exhausted to question authority that looked the part. He reached the second floor, found an empty office, and closed the door. Inside, he removed a stack of neatly typed documents from his briefcase. They were stamped, signed, official-looking. He laid them out on the desk, rearranged them with quiet precision, then pressed the intercom buzzer. A clerk appeared. "I'll need a runner," the man said. "Two, actually. One to the telegraph office. One to the Ministry of Finance." The clerk nodded and disappeared. The man straightened his cuffs and waited. By 10:55, he had issued his first memorandum. By emergency authority vested through provisional succession, Anton Freistadt assumes temporary executive control until further notice. No one questioned the name. There had been so many names: Ebert, Scheidman, Noske, Liebknecht, Muller. One more name meant little, especially when spoken in the calm, clipped tones of a man who clearly belonged here. At 10:59, he entered the main corridor, where a small group of lower ministers and military aides had gathered, awaiting some kind of announcement. He gave him one. "There has been an internal breach in the transitional government," he said. "Until communications are restored and loyal ministry secured, I will assume limited command of state functions under the provisional mandate of Section 4, Article 7. No such article existed. No one checked. Instead, someone asked, "What are your orders, Chancellor?" And so, for the next 20 minutes, he ruled Berlin. He signed 3 directives. One suspended 2 department heads suspected of disloyalty. One reallocated 100,000 marks in relief funds to Eastern supply depots. One ordered the immediate review of telegraph communications to prevent further infiltration. None of these were real, but they were accepted. The papers bore the right stamps. The man bore the right tone. His handwriting was flawless. The guards saluted him. Secretaries typed his orders. No one questioned where he came from, because in a city where truth had collapsed along with the empire, certainty, any certainty, was craved more than clarity. It was 11:18 when the first challenge came. A mid-ranking army officer, recently assigned to internal security, arrived with a puzzled look and too many questions. He asked for credentials. The man provided none. The officer frowned and asked again, louder this time. That was enough. The illusion cracked. The air in the room changed. A few people backed away. Someone whispered. The man, Anton Freistadt, if that had ever been his name, paused just long enough to let the silence thicken. Then he nodded curtly, turned, and walked back down the corridor. No one stopped him. By the time the officer realized what had happened, the overcoat was hanging on a hook in a back stairwell, and the man who had worn it was already gone. Gone, but not forgotten. And behind him, in an office with real furniture and real documents, sat 3 stamped orders, carried out without question, signed by a man who never existed. The Reich Chancellery sealed its doors an hour later. Inside, panic ran beneath the surface like a cracked pipe. No alarms had been raised, no weapons drawn, but the quiet was brutal. One clerk sobbed into her scarf when she realized she had delivered one of the forged orders. A junior officer was vomiting in the courtyard, muttering about court-martial. Someone locked the typewriters away. The man was gone. A complete search of the building revealed nothing. No identification, no real name, not even a fingerprint. The overcoat he left behind was expertly tailored, but label-less. The briefcase lined with velvet, but empty. No initials. No personal effects. He had left behind nothing but presents and documents. The forged seal was good. Not perfect, but close enough that only under magnification could anyone tell it was fake. The ink was state issue. The paper was recycled government stock. The signature, Anton Freistadt, was clean and confident, looped like a man used to being obeyed. By mid-afternoon, a quiet meeting was held in a closed room on the third floor. No press, no witnesses. 5 men sat around the table, one of them with a trembling cigarette that never left his lips. "This cannot be public," one said. "It already is," another replied. Outside the building, word was leaking. At first it came in fragments, from guards who whispered in beer halls, from clerks who couldn't sit on a secret that large. Then it reached the cafes, where newsboys who couldn't spell Freistadt were already charging double for the word imposter. The Berliner Morgenpost printed a small column the next morning. Impersonation incident at government building. Authorities dismiss security lapse. No names, no details, but the city had eyes. It wasn't just the absurdity of the event that caught fire. It was the ease. Berliners were used to occupation, by poverty, by politics, by promises. But they weren't used to someone walking into the heart of government and being believed with no questions asked. For some, it was comedy. For others, prophecy. The cafes buzzed with theories. He was a monarchist, one man said, lighting his third cigarette. Sent to test the loyalty of the army. "No," said another. "It was a Bolshevik trick, psychological warfare. Moscow's behind it." One woman leaned in and whispered, "What if he really was the chancellor? What if the government doesn't know who it serves anymore?" By the end of the week, the name Anton Freistadt had entered urban legend. Children used it to bluff their way out of homework. Pickpockets claimed it when caught. One actor at the Stadttheater began using it as a stage name, only to be shut down by police after 3 performances. Behind closed doors, the Ministry of the Interior launched an investigation. Quiet, informal, deeply nervous. They interviewed 30 people. All had different descriptions. Some said the man was old. Others said young. Some claimed he limped. Others said he moved like a dancer. The only constant was the voice. Measured, flat, commanding. No one remembered shouting. No one remembered him smiling. A week later, they reached out to the local asylums. No escapes. No matches. They contacted the army. No deserters fit the profile. They asked the Swiss and the French if they had any intelligence on known infiltrators. Silence. The trail died faster than it had started. And the papers, after an initial flurry of sly editorials and half-joking cartoons, dropped the story. Not because it was uninteresting, but because it was uncontrollable. No one knew where the man had come from. No one knew where he went. But everyone knew what he had done. He had signed real orders. He had controlled the Chancellery. He had ruled Berlin, even if only for 20 minutes. In the following months, the story was reshaped like clay, pressed into whatever mold people needed. The government tried to forget it. Bureaucrats shuffled the event into unofficial logs, coded as an administrative impersonation, a phrase so dry it barely registered as language. Internal memos were quietly circulated warning against unauthorized access to authority-bearing materials. The doors of the Reich Chancellery were reinforced. Signatures were now checked twice, seals 3 times. But the man had already slipped into myth. In Kreuzberg, a struggling novelist published a thinly veiled fiction titled The Phantom Chancellor, which sold out its first printing in 3 days. In Friedrichshain, an anti-monarchist pamphlet claimed the man was a living metaphor, a walking indictment of the old system's collapse. In church basements, some whispered that he had been an angel, sent to prove how close mankind stood to obedience without meaning. At night, in smoky corners of factories and train yards, men passed bottles and told the story like a fairy tale. He walked in and took it. No one stopped him. He gave the orders, and they followed. The truth, what little remained of it, became irrelevant. What mattered now was the idea that the state could be tricked. That the whole machine, built of rules and ranks and rituals, could be puppeteered by anyone with the right voice and the right coat. Not everyone was amused. In conservative circles, the story ignited panic. In monarchist salons and military clubs, former officers muttered about disgrace. That one man, unarmed, unescorted, without nobility or commission, could seize the heart of Berlin's government. Even briefly, was a humiliation too deep to laugh off. One retired general was said to have burned his uniform in disgust. In the Reichswehr, the incident became a case study, passed around in closed briefings under the heading Vulnerability of Transitional Structures. Officers were warned. Never assume, never trust credentials over confirmation, never confuse posture for power. But that was just the surface. Beneath, in the bones of the Republic, the event festered like an unhealed wound. Because if it could happen once, it could happen again. And what if the next man didn't leave after 20 minutes? A journalist named Emil Strauss tried to find out. He was young, ambitious, and had something no one else had bothered to gather: patience. He tracked down every witness he could find: clerks, guards, runners, secretaries. He sketched maps of the Chancellery's corridors, pieced together minute-by-minute timelines. What emerged was surreal. The man had arrived alone, carrying no identification, offered no orders at the gate. He'd simply used language and tone to move forward. Not lies, not threats, just certainty. One guard recalled a single phrase: "Delay is disloyalty." It was enough to open a door. Strauss dug deeper. He interviewed a middle-aged woman who worked in records. She claimed to have typed one of the memoranda herself. He had the calm of someone used to being followed, she said. He didn't smile. He didn't shout. He just spoke and we acted. When Strauss asked if she ever believed he was legitimate, she said nothing for a moment. He made me want to believe. Strauss' article, titled "The Chancellor Who Wasn't," was published 6 months after the event. It caused a brief stir, then silence, because no government wants to remember how fragile it really is. And no people want to know how easily they can be ruled if someone speaks with the right weight behind their words. The man was never found. No face ever matched. No letter ever arrived claiming credit. Whoever he was, he had walked through the highest corridors of power without raising a hand, and left without taking a single coin. He had taken only something far rarer. He had taken obedience. 2 years passed. Germany changed. Governments rose and fell like bad actors in a longer tragedy. The currency frayed, the coal ran thin, and people learned to live with less. But somewhere in the fog of that new reality, the memory of Anton Freistadt, or the man who wore his name, remained. The archives of the Republic contained nothing concrete. No arrest, no photo, no confession, but a quiet note filed deep in a cabinet labeled "Irregular Incidents," outlined a possibility. In 1921, a man matching Freistadt's description was reportedly seen in Hamburg, walking through the old naval district. Same coat, same gait. He walked into a union meeting, sat for 20 minutes, said nothing, and left. No one spoke to him. No one stopped him. And afterward, no one could agree whether he had actually been there. It became a pattern. In Cologne, a railway administrator claimed a man in a gray overcoat inspected the telegraph room, nodded, and walked out without a word. In Breslau, a woman swore on her life that a man who fit the description slipped her a paper that simply read, "Check the locks before they are used against you." In Leipzig, someone left a forged ministerial seal in the courthouse, a perfect copy. It was never used. Each incident alone meant little. A man, a rumor, a prank. But together, they painted something stranger. Not a one-time fraud, but a man testing the boundaries of a system he no longer feared. Some called it a game. Others whispered something darker. That Freistadt wasn't a con man, but a prototype. A template for something to come. A man whose power didn't come from violence or even deception, but from a simple fact that people wanted someone, anyone, to appear competent. And when he did, they gave him power. Not because he stole it, but because they offered it. By 1923, hyperinflation devoured Germany. Bread cost billions. Families burned paper marks for heat. Faith in leadership collapsed. Extremes rose. And quietly, in that crucible, the story returned. Anton Freistadt became legend again, this time with sharper edges. Street artists drew his silhouette, faceless, commanding, with a crown made of rubber stamps. Radicals on both the left and right cited him as a metaphor, a ghost of order or a symbol of deception. In cafes, young men who had never known a Kaiser toasted to the man who ruled with ink. A teacher in Heidelberg was fired after assigning an essay titled, "If you had 20 minutes of power, what would you do?" And still, no one knew who he was. Some said he had died. Others, that he had never been real at all, a shared delusion, born of a country so desperate for structure that it invented its own phantoms. But then came the letter. In late 1924, a sealed envelope arrived at the editorial desk of the Berliner Tageblatt. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper, written in dark blue ink. It read, "I was not the first. I will not be the last. Your government is made of doors, not walls." All I did was knock. There was no name. But beneath the words was the now familiar mark, the crude A. Freistadt signature. The editor, a rational man with 30 years in the business, read it twice. Then he lit a match, burned the paper to ash, and never spoke of it again. But rumors have no tomb. Within a week, copies of the text appeared scrawled on alley walls in chalk. One was painted across the closed gates of a police station. Another was etched almost surgically into a minister's leather briefcase. No break-in, no sign of forced entry. He was not coming back. He had never left. And in the cracks of the state, he still walked. Years passed. Governments hardened. Memories frayed. By the late 1920s, the story of the man who once ruled Berlin for 20 minutes had begun to fade into the folds of rumor. It became folklore, then metaphor, then nothing more than a strange footnote in coffeehouse conversation. The world moved on, but systems remember what they fear. Within the Ministry of the Interior, a thin beige folder remained locked behind a false panel in a steel cabinet. The label had faded, the ink dried to dust, but inside were transcripts, testimony fragments, reproductions of the forged decrees, and 2 photos. One of the hallway Freistadt walked through, and one of his abandoned overcoat, slumped on a wooden bench like a shed skin. No photograph of the man himself existed. In 1928, a young archivist named Lenz discovered the folder while performing routine reclassification. He asked his supervisor about it. The man simply shook his head. "Don't dig into ghosts," he said. "They don't like the light." But Lenz was curious, dangerously so. He began looking deeper, writing letters to surviving witnesses, reviewing old blueprints of the Chancellery, and checking visitor logs that had been quietly scrubbed. What he found unnerved him. First, the visitor log for that day had one name added in pencil, Friedrich A. Mann, and then erased so carefully that it could only be seen under angled light. Second, the woman who typed the third order, now living in a convent, refused to speak his name aloud. "He didn't lie," she whispered through the gate. "He just assumed it was his." Finally, in an unmarked box inside the Reichsarchiv, Lenz found a collection of clippings from provincial newspapers. Most were irrelevant, but one stood out. A short piece, published in a small village near Kassel, dated March 16, 1919, just 3 days after the incident. A stranger arrived. He stayed one night at the inn, paid in silver. No name given. He left a note under his plate. "I did not take power. I borrowed it. You gave it freely." Lenz copied the clipping and brought it to his superior. The man read it, then set it face down. "Archive it," he said, "and then forget it." Lenz tried, but forgetting a man who had ruled by silence was like forgetting a sound that never stopped ringing. And then, in 1930, the sound returned. In Nuremberg, a small political rally, a man took the stage wearing a gray overcoat. He spoke for exactly 3 minutes. No slogan, no party name, no promises, only a single phrase, spoken twice. "Power belongs to those who act like they already have it." He stepped down. No one caught his name. No one knew who invited him. But in the days that followed, those words were repeated across tea rooms, and rail cars like a spell. The police reviewed the rally footage. It was grainy, blurred, but the profile was unmistakable. Same bearing, same walk. The file in Berlin was quietly updated. A handwritten note was added in the margin. Cited, no confrontation. Standing order, observe only. No one dared chase a myth. By then, Anton Freistadt had become more than a man. He was a pattern, a caution, a whisper of how systems break, not with explosions, but with a knock, firm, practiced, and spoken in the language of authority. He had never used violence, never raised his voice. He had simply stepped into a gap and watched the world make room. And in that space, brief, silent, unforgettable, he'd shown something terrifying. That if you walk like a ruler and speak like a ruler and write like a ruler, people will follow, even if you vanish, even if you never were. The 1930s arrived with new uniforms and louder voices. Flags multiplied, salutes replaced handshakes. And in this newly sharpened world, the name Anton Freistadt became something far more dangerous than a rumor. It became a threat. Inside high-security meetings, his name was occasionally spoken, never written, and always with bitterness. He had done, without weapons or followers, what entire parties and militias had failed to do. Seize control with nothing but timing and tone. And he had made the government obey him. In 1933, when the Reichstag burned and power was reshaped into a single hand, a strange directive was passed among state departments. Any individual impersonating or falsifying rank would be considered a traitor to the state, punishable not by arrest, but immediate execution. No one mentioned Freistadt. They didn't need to. The system had learned its lesson. Doors were reinforced with steel. Credentials became multi-tiered. Interior corridors were restricted. But none of it addressed the truth that had been exposed. The greatest weakness was not the walls. It was the belief of those inside them. In the winter of 1934, a man was detained outside a post office in Dresden. He had presented forged documents claiming oversight authority from the Interior Ministry. His coat was gray, his voice precise, and his documents, though fake, were crafted with such skill that the local clerks nearly followed his instructions. He offered no resistance, spoke calmly, smiled once. When interrogated, he gave no name. But one officer, nervous, leaned in and asked, "Are you him?" The man tilted his head. "If I were," he said, "you wouldn't be asking." He was transferred to Berlin. But somewhere between transport stations, he vanished. The train manifest showed no irregularities. No guard could remember the precise moment he was last seen. One said he had simply stepped into the fog. The incident was never reported publicly. But within the Reich Main Security Office, a revised memo was issued. If encountered again, eliminate without question. This is not a man. This is a fault line. And still, he appeared. A witness claimed to see him at the back of a military tribunal in Munich. Another, in the crowd at a state parade in Leipzig. A third swore she saw him in a boarding house in Prague, reading quietly by candlelight. Each time, same description, same silence. Always gone before anyone could ask twice. By the end of the decade, war had returned. Maps shifted like paper and fire. The world bled, and Freistadt vanished with it. After 1945, when Berlin was rubble and records lay charred in ash and soil, a Soviet officer uncovered a sealed envelope in a collapsed government archive. Inside was a single page, folded, yellowed, untouched. There was no signature, but 3 initials, hand-pressed at the bottom, shaped with the same perfect loops that once passed through the Chancellery unnoticed. The message read, "Authority is an illusion printed on paper and sealed with fear. You may bury me, but what I showed you cannot be unlearned." 20 minutes was enough. It always is. The Soviet officer pocketed the page. He never submitted it. He, too, had followed orders once without asking, and he remembered the chill of it. In the decades that followed, the name Anton Freistadt appeared only in obscure books, whispered lectures, and classified case studies of systemic failure. His story was always incomplete. A ghost wearing a coat, a man without origin, an event without logic. But those who understood systems, they remembered, not because of what he did, but because he proved something they feared far more than revolution or rebellion: that the state, for all its rituals and hierarchies, is made of people. And people, when presented with enough confidence and the right costume, will follow almost anyone, even a stranger, even for just 20 minutes. Even still,